I'm intrigued to see the conference where it just means more and how that plays out. The Southeastern Conference. I'm going to go down to the SEC here because you have a Kentucky program that's coming off of an uncharacteristically bad year, a historically bad season. So what happens with their transfer additions? Kellen Grady looks like a player who should really add a lot. Has had great coaching. We talked about that last week. Oscar Tshiebwe as well, and the Wildcats bring in the recruits that they have. Some steady pieces back. John Calipari needs to bounce back. The most intriguing player in the Southeastern Conference is not a Kentucky Wildcat, in my opinion. The most intriguing player in the Southeastern Conference is Kennedy Chandler. I am really, really fascinated to see what happens with Tennessee. I think that the Vols have some interesting players. They're going to be a team that can space the floor well. I like them as well and their makeup. Let's continue. Alabama. You're talking about Jaden Shackelford. You're talking about a program that went to the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2004. Nate Oates has things running and rolling again. And while the Tide did lose some key pieces, man, I'll miss Herb Jones. The Tide are still a great defensive team. Their metrics last year, they took a jump, guys, from 124th in the country the year before to 3rd. Their defense was fantastic. That's going to translate here again this season. And oh, by the way, the Must Bus in Arkansas have things in a really, really good spot. And Arkansas is the team that people, I think, respect now, but don't even fully know how good that they could be. The SEC is in for a big-time conference schedule, and I am deeply intrigued by the Southeastern Conference.
That was going to be one of my points too of this year. Is the SEC the best conference in college basketball? We've always known that the SEC is a football conference, but there's been so many schools that have heavily invested when it comes to coaching staffs, when it comes to facilities, when it comes to practice, all these things. And it has turned out really well. In my opinion, the SEC has 9 teams that could make the NCAA tournament. It is murderer's row every single night in the SEC. And you said it. Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky obviously is going to be good. But how about Florida, who bring in 2 transfers that were defensive players of the year in their conference? Auburn might have the best front court in the entire conference. Mississippi State bring in Shaquille Moore, Rocket Watts, Garrison Brooks, Tolu Smith returns after being one of the best rebounding teams, not only in the SEC, but the country. The SEC from top to bottom this season is the best conference in college basketball.
It's interesting that you say that because I don't necessarily disagree. I think that it's as deep as any conference in the country. And I think that the league play is just going to be a complete meat grinder. But I don't know if there's necessarily a national title favorite in that conference, right? Like the best team is who? Kentucky? Mm-hmm. Do they have an All-American on their team? Who's going to play the point guard? Do we know how Kellen Grady and CJ Frederick are going to fit into this roster? Is Coach Cal going to play 2 bigs at the same time? There's question marks there. Arkansas, how are things going to operate when you have 5'7" Chris Lights, a shoot first point guard running the show, right? There's question marks there. Alabama, you mentioned their defense, Fanta. Well, they lose Herb Jones, and I don't know what that defense is going to be without a guy as good as Herb Jones. Tennessee is basically trusting in a freshman point guard. And look, I love Kennedy Chandler. Freshman point guards are freshman point guards. There's a reason why they're freshmen. There's questions with Auburn. So there's a lot of teams that have a lot of things that they have to figure out. But I do think that we're going to have so many good basketball games in that league. And look, Arkansas just got a 5-star commit. Alabama just got a 5-star commit. Will Wade's never going to stop recruiting, right? John Calipari, that league is only trending upward. And Tio, I do have one little beef with what you said. You did not mention Flanders Fleming by name at Florida. We shall never speak about Florida.
Hold on. First of all, Flanders Fleming Jr. How dare you disrespect that man's father? So, no, he's fantastic. 2-time Big South Player of the Year. He's got good length. He shoots it well enough. Florida's going to be really good. There's so many defensive weapons there, not to mention Colin Castleton's coming back, who was the first team all-defensive team member for the SEC last year. Florida's going to be good. Are they going to be able to score enough is the biggest question, but they are old for the first time, I think, in the past 3 or 4 years. They've been in the bottom 20 in the country in terms of age and experience and playing time from season to season over the past few years. Mike White got sick of all the rookie mistakes. He brought in a bunch of old guys, and Florida should be pretty good, and they'll benefit because of it.
Yeah, I actually just did an interview with Mike White for our season preview series, and one of the things that I did ask him was, you have all of this. You follow Billy Donovan, right? Florida is a school that has all of these expectations when it comes to not just basketball, but any sport. And here you are, and like he hasn't had bad results, right? Like he's been to the tournament. I think it's 4 out of his 6 years, and it would be 5 if the 2020 tournament didn't get erased. He's never finished below like 500 in the league, but there's only really been 1 year where they made a run in the tournament. And there's only really been 1 year where they were kind of in that conversation for SEC championships. And I was like, do you kind of feel that pressure at all? And he's like, well, I think it's kind of unfair that there isn't any pressure at all. Like the thing people forget about Florida, and I feel like this never gets talked about enough. They lost their best player last season, 4 games into the year, with something that frankly would be pretty traumatic for anybody to see for a teammate happen. So I'm very, very intrigued to see what this kind of like rebooted Florida team is going to end up looking like. Because I thought that last year was their year, right? Last year was supposed to be their year.
Yeah. But the one thing I think is 9 new players on that roster. I think that's the count. I mean, it's quite a few. With that many new faces, how does this all shake out? I think that Mike White is an underrated coach. And, it's tough because you do expect down in Florida, the expectation is to be at the top of the SEC, and they have to get back there. I think that that's the most fascinating thing about this conference this year. And sometimes the best conference doesn't have the national championship 2 or 3 contenders that you want. I do think, though, this is where I disagree with you, Rob. I think that just because at this stage of the year, we don't think that there's a Southeastern Conference national championship contender or 2, doesn't mean we might not find out that there is one by the time January or February rolls around. It's a marathon of a season. There's a lot of new faces in this league. We have to see the kind of coaching that results in this conference. I think that what's really interesting is, when was the last time that we're talking about Kentucky basketball not being the king, or at least right near the throne in the SEC? And we could be talking about that again this year if the Wildcats don't put it together. And the reason why I say that is not because of Kentucky. It's because there is an immense amount of pressure around them, pressure that they have not felt before in the SEC. These schools are gunning for that SEC title. Now there's a belief factor. There's a factor of they can get big-time 5-star recruits as well. And you've got coaches, Nate Oates at Bama, Eric Musselman at Arkansas. The fact that Rick Barnes is in the league speaks for itself. That can be right there. So who's got the most pressure on them heading into this year? It is without question the Kentucky Wildcats. How's Severe Wheeler going to work out? I'm really interested to see what he does. And I think that just because we're not talking national championship with the SEC now, it is the deepest conference in the country. And in the regular season, that provides for some amazing midweek conference and some amazing Saturday games.
Yeah, you mentioned pressure on Kentucky and Coach Cal. I do think that this is the first time there's ever actually been real pressure on him to try to find a way to succeed and find a way to win. I mean, you can't have the year that Kentucky had last year in that state, in that basketball program, and not have people start saying, well, why is this happening this way? And look, a lot of what happened with Kentucky had to do with some of the situations around COVID and around the regulations and around not
had everything to do with it.
Yeah, had everything to do with it. But it's still, the results are the results. And I don't think that that can be overlooked. So this is the first time there's been real pressure on Coach Cal. But I will say this, I think that pressure is part of the reason why we saw a little bit of an uptick in Kentucky's recruiting over the last couple of years. T.O., put a ball in the SEC for us.
Put a what? Sorry.
Put a ball on it. Put a ball on this conversation.
Put a ball on it. No, I just think it's a fantastic conference from top to bottom. And the fact that all these coaches are so stinking good. I will say this about Kentucky, having these old guys, and I feel like I harp on old dudes all the time. I talk about it all the time, every time we're on the podcast. But the fact that they didn't get to implement their culture the year before, like we've talked about Cal not being a big X's and O's guy, that's true. Somebody argued with you. It's true. he's not a huge X's and O's guy, but he is a huge culture guy. He is a huge little things guy, 2 hands on a rebound. You've heard him say it. If you watch any of Kentucky's practices on all these things they do online or on television with ESPN, like you have to establish those little things. Not having that summer is huge. And I think Kentucky, by the time all said and done, I think a Final Four is possible. But I will caution SEC fans. I will say it's the deepest conference, and I still think it's the best conference thus far. They might beat each other up, and you might not have a number 1 seed.
Hey, Big Ten, man. I mean, Big Ten last year beats each other up. The whole season, Big Ten's the best conference. Big Ten's the best conference. This is the best league in the country all season long. It don't mean nothing if 80% of your league is out by Friday of the NCAA tournament. It doesn't. Sometimes it's okay to have a league where you only get 4 teams in if the 4 teams are really good.
Yeah, the only thing I would say to push back on that, Fanta, is that, yes, you're right that it was a little bit overrated by the time things all kind of shook out. And I do think the fact that there were so many teams that were kind of in that like 30 to 50 range really bumps up all their computer numbers, which is why you saw so many teams get into the tournament, even though there were a lot of kind of, I think it's fair to say, fairly mediocre teams kind of in the middle of that league. But I think part of the reason why we didn't see as many teams make a deep run from the Big Ten is, one, Illinois ran into the worst possible matchup they could have had, where they ran into a team that did nothing but dribble handoffs, nothing but ball screens, and ran an offense that was specifically designed around pulling a 5-man away from the basket. And you know what? Loyola's really good. And 2, I think that the conversation surrounding Michigan and UCLA's run to the Final Four is very different if there is a healthy Isaiah Livers for the Wolverines once everything is all said and done. But